Alright, so once you have your pumpkin basically made, you want to make sure that you are saving your scenes and make sure that you have a project set up. So you want to go to File, you want to go down to your project window, and you're going to want to set up a project, give it a name. I gave mine Jack-O-Lantern for 3D print. It's going to go into your default projects folder. You should look here and look where the location of it's going to be. I'm not going to talk about all the details of this. There's videos about that. You can look online. I have videos about creating a project. You can find that. Um, and then save your scene, because in that folder I always keep my my different types of files gathered up. And so I'll have an OBJ file, I'll have an STL file, I'll have a Mudbox file, I'll have all kinds of files in there, all in that one nice project folder, so it's very organized and I can find things. One other thing is you're going to want to make sure you keep stages of your project. So for instance, if I make a model, I might have my base model version 1.1, and then if I make changes to it, I'll make a 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, on and on and on as I go along. This particular model is very, very simple, but what I'm going to do is I've saved it as this kind of in this state, and now I'm going to say save as 1.2, and I'm going to, it's not my base geometry anymore, I'm going to call it my extrude edges. And so that's going to give me a start, so I can go back if I mess this up, if this gets all messed up and I can't fix it. I can go back to my base mesh that I have that's basically very simple, and I have a place to go back. And then once I work with it a little bit more, after I extrude my faces or all my edges in and get a thickness to my model, I'll save that before I extrude out the pumpkin stem. That way I always have kind of a fallback. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is do my extrusion in. I'm going to select my faces, and I'm going to select all these, and they're highlighted here, and I'm calling it a pumpkin or a jack-o'-lantern, whatever you want to call it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my edit mesh, and I'm going to go down to extrude. I'm going to go to my options box here. I'm going to hit edit, reset settings, and I'm going to say extrude. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out my faces a little bit. Now I know that when I pull out in the Z axis, it's going to pull away from my model, and this is what I want. I want to add some thickness to my model, but I want to be able to control how thick that actually is, and that's where my translate Z actually is coming into place. If I was to translate 1 unit, that would be 1 centimeter in thickness. That's a centimeter, and I don't want that. I need 2 millimeters, which would be 0.2. So centimeters obviously breaks down into 10 millimeters, and I want my walls to be 2 millimeter thick at a model that is 4 centimeters or 40 millimeters wide. So the idea is, however thick you make your walls, you can control that. And so what I want to do is give myself a nice wall thickness here of 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters, you can think about, like in America, a quarter. A quarter is about a one thickness. I always think about Lego toys or something that I can gauge how thick something is. And so I don't want it to be too thin. I want the printer to be able to build a thick enough wall that gives me a nice solid object when it's printed, but I don't want it to be too thick, then it's unnecessary. So I'm going to start with, and again, these are things that you can change on your own. If you print this out, you don't like it, if it's not good enough for you, then you can change it, but the process is something that you'll be familiar with. So I'm making a 2 millimeter thick wall, and I'm happy with that. Now let me show you a nice handy tool that you can use to work with something like this. Say you didn't know how thick this was, and I'm using my units, the units of my grid, in order to to know how thick things are. And so again, my units are, every 1 unit is a centimeter, and then I subdivide that into 10 smaller units. My actual grid settings would look like this. My entire grid will be 12 units from one side to the other, so 12 units here, so 12 centimeters from the mid, so it's actually 24 centimeters wide. I could change that if I wanted to something else. Then grid lines are every 1 unit, so I have a total of 12 units from here to the edge, and then I'm dividing that per unit, so there's 12 individual units, and then that is divided into 10 units here. And so that's how I am working with that. And I can change my line colors and everything to make it a little more visible. So my actual grid lines, if I wanted to, I could make those a different color. And I could say something red or something a lot more visible to see. And when I do that, you can see that it changes the color there. And whatever you can do to make it visible for you. Alright. So if I wanted to measure something on my object, one thing that I could do is I could use a measuring tool. I could go to Create, and I could use Measure Tool and say a distance. And what that's going to do is when I click on a grid, I'm going to use my X key and I'm going to snap to a grid, and it's going to create for me some locators. I'm gonna undo that for a second, and what I want to do is, seems to be stuck there. I'm gonna go to my outliner really fast and get rid of that and get rid of that. Alright, so I'm gonna go to my orthographic view really quickly. It seems to help. So I'm gonna go up to Create, and I'm going to go to Measure and a Distance tool, and when I click out here in space, I get these locators, and these locators give me, I'm going to hide my grid so you can see it, give me a tool that allows me to, when I select one of these and move it, let me use my outliner again. Sometimes that tool is easier to work with. So I'm going to pull that, and it gives me the ability to read the distance. So this is 2 centimeters, 0.4. And so what I can do is, on my model, it's not letting me select it for some reason, so I'm going to use my outliner to grab it. I'm going to go over here to my model, and I'm going to have to move it. I'm going to go down here as best I can. And so what I want to do is I'm going to select my model. And one of the neat things we can do is we can display certain things like vertices. So I'm going to say display vertices. And I can select this, and I'm going to hold down my V key, and I'm going to snap it to a vertex. I'm going to snap it to this one here on the front of his face here. I got to find the right one. It's a little bit hard to do in that particular view. So I'm going to go, let's say, snap to vertex right here, and I'm going to grab this one, and I'm going to say snap to vertex right there. And I can see that I have about, it says 1.9. And so I can see that I have about a distance of about 2 millimeters, which is exactly what I want. And so I know that that thickness is what I'm going for. And if I go to my extrude here, I go down to my translate Y. So I'm pretty happy with that. So that thickness is what I'm looking for. Okay, so I have a thickness of about 2 millimeters, which is fine because I'm going to scale this model up. All I want to know is make sure my wall isn't too thin. Okay, so this would be a good time for me to save. my vertices are being displayed even though my model is in object mode, and I'm going to turn that off because it's already somewhat hard to see certain things. So I'm going to undisplay them, and I'm going to save my model as an extruded edge as it is here, and now I'm going to say save as, and I'm going to say this is going to be model version 1. I always change my number first because what I end up doing is sometimes I'll change the name and forget to change the number. And I always want my model, my scenes to be an incremental. And so this is pumpkin extrude edges. Now I'm going to say add stem. I'm going to say save as. And so now I'm going to go up to the top here, and I want to be careful I choose the right faces. What I don't want to do is get into a spot where I'm sharing an edge like this necessarily. I want to make sure that I'm extruding up geometry that will not give me any real problems. And I'm looking at my model, and I want to make sure I don't have any faces on an edge, where if I had one of these little face center, this is displaying the faces through being in the center. That's something you can turn on in your preferences and settings under your selections. If you go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Preferences, and under Selection, let's see, right down here, I can choose Select Faces with Center. That gives you an iconic or a little indicator of where the center of the face is. Otherwise there's nothing there, and you can't see it. There's faces on top of edges, or faces with zero length. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my paint select tool, and I'm going to grab an area within on my pumpkin head here, that I want to use as my kind of center for my stem. I need to kind of look at this. I'm going to look at it from my top view so I don't get too confused of what it is where my middle is. So here's my middle. And I'm going to paint something like so. Just a nice kind of square area. Looking at these boundaries here, I'm just going to be 2 in and 2 in and 2 in and 2 in. And I'm going to look at that from the perspective view. Make sure I like that. Yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to extrude that up a little bit. And I'm going to do it from the front, and I'm going to use a curve in order to make it a little bit easier for myself. So I'm going to go to my front camera, and I modeled my pumpkin so that the face is pointing down the z-axis, so that makes it a little bit easier. I'm not working at any strange angles. So I'm going to make my pumpkin stem follow a little curve. So I'm going to go up to my, I'm going to turn off that tool, go to Create, go to CV Curve, and I'm going to use my CV Curve tool in the cubic setting. And I'm simply going to I'm going to create a little bit of a curve here that my stem can follow. Now I have the beginning here and the end there, and the face is going to follow that curve from beginning to end. If my beginning was here, then the faces would jump to this point and follow the curve back down. I don't want that. If you right click on your object and you say Control Vertex, you can see that this has a little square and a U, and that's the beginning point, and the direction of the curve is going in this direction. So those faces that I just selected, which I have unselected now, I'll have to go back and reselect them, and I'm going to put on shading wireframe on shaded so I can see those faces once again. Do it here again. These faces that are going to be in the middle here are the ones I want to use. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you a quick trick. I go here and I choose these two faces, and I hit wrong button. I hit Shift greater than, or the period. I can expand that selection real nicely. So I'm just simply going to expand that selection, and I wanna go into I wanna grab this curve. Actually, I wanna go back to grab this curve